We come to Mass on Sunday for a variety of reasons, and I think in this day and age, many people come, they need to be, and we should be encouraged. We come and we are encouraged by our faith, by the fidelity of Jesus and His mercy. So we come for encouragement. We come to sit in community. We are a community of faith. We are really a worldwide, the Catholic Church, a worldwide community of faith. So we come to kind of participate in this common life as Christians. We come to receive the grace of God, to receive His mercy, that the mercy of God would be washed over us, to receive Holy Communion or to receive a blessing, to renew the covenant in the blood of Jesus. You know, we are members of the family of God. We were adopted into the family of God, and we've been invited over for Sunday meal. And we come to the Father's house to participate in our birthright. We come to worship God. All of these reasons we're here. But we're also here to be challenged. We're here to be challenged, sometimes to be shaken out of our complacency. The gospel today is incredibly challenging. Now, as I look out at this congregation, many of you, if I passed out a sheet of paper and I said, check a box, wealthy, not so wealthy, in debt, poor, struggling, which box would you check? Not so many of you might check wealthy. You'd leave that for Bill Gates and, Drew Brees or whoever, right? But the reality is, especially if we look at history, if we look at the history of the world and the material abundance that we have today, how many of you are worried about not getting enough calories? How many are worried about getting too many calories? How many don't have any clothes in your closet? How many have so much clothes that you got to find some place to put them away or throw them away or something? We have this material abundance that we absolutely take for granted. And even the poor people in the United States of America are generally well off, especially from the standpoint of history. Now, granted, we have children, we have people with addictions and mental health problems and drug addicts and those kind of things that are a different kind of poverty. It's a real poverty, to be sure, but it's not necessarily the kind of poverty that the poor man in the gospel today was suffering from. So the gospel today is going to challenge us as rich people. And please don't argue with me about being rich. You are. The gospel today is going to challenge us about being wealthy. There are a number of different things happening in the gospel, and I'm going to try to go through them as quickly as I can. First of all, there were certain people in the Jewish community that would have denied that the soul lives on after death. And so Jesus is addressing that immediately. The soul lives on after death. After you die, you're going to the next life. And so we have Lazarus who goes to the next life, and we have the rich man who is unnamed, and he goes to the next life. So that was one thing. And then secondly, in the next life there will be retribution, or there will be reward for how we lived in this life. So those 2 points are right at the very top of the gospel. We have to recognize that life continues after the death of the body, and that when we die, we will stand before the judge and we will give an accounting of ourselves, and God, who knows our essence and knows everything about us, will reward us, or we will suffer some punishment. And that needs to be in the front of our brain as we go through this life. Another element of the gospel is this very poor man, Lazarus, laying in the street with the dogs licking his wounds. He, in the words or in the explanation of Jesus, as we read between the lines, he has a great dignity. He goes to the bosom of Abraham, to the place of great honor. That's what the bosom of Abraham was. So the dignity of even the poor. There's another element of this gospel that Jesus would have been correcting, that people thought, well, if I am materially well off, then obviously I am blessed by God and I am in this place of material prosperity because I'm one of God's favorites. And Jesus is correcting that mistake and saying you can be materially well off and not be one of God's favorites, and you can be very poor and be one of God's favorites. You see all of these elements in this gospel that are present. The Second Vatican Council, referring to Lazarus in this story, lays stress on the fact that we must respect every human person regardless of their economic, physical stature. Who lived that in many of you all's lifetime? Who lived that care for the poorest of the poor, the most downtrodden, the absolutely rejected so beautifully? Mother Teresa, as she ministered to those in the streets. The church, thinking now, putting together the gospel that we just heard a moment ago, the gospel of the rich man and Lazarus. We think about the Good Samaritan as well. The Good Samaritan looked on the half-dead man lying on the side of the road, stripped and beaten, and the Good Samaritan had compassion on him. He suffered with him. The church teaches us that we must see people as another self. That when we see the poor and the downtrodden, the man in the street, that we see them and we see ourselves there. The story of Lazarus. Let there be no doubt, everything in the parable that describes Lazarus tells us how utterly miserable and hopeless he is. He's covered in sores. Undoubtedly, he's in pain. He's hungry. He lives on scraps of food. Dogs come and lick his sores. It was interesting as I was reading the commentary on this gospel, and we might think that the dogs that come and lick his sores would be kind of like he was comforted by the dogs. But dogs were seen as an unclean animal. It would be like vultures in a sense. Now, there were some other commentaries that talked about the fact that the dogs treated the man better than the rich man did. So there is that kind of idea there as well, that this man has lost his human dignity and he's treated better by the animals than he is by human beings. So that is a reading that some modern Western interpreters put it there. So, what other stories, what other elements come to us that challenge us in this gospel? This gospel should challenge us because you're rich. Oh, don't argue with me about not being rich. You are. That our earthly possessions are ephemeral. They're wispy. They go away like a breath on a cold day. We're going to have them for a moment in eternity. And they are given to us that we may share. They are given to us that we may give glory to God. You know, when John Paul II visited New York City in 1979, he gave a very powerful reflection on the rich man and Lazarus, speaking in New York City, speaking to some of the wealthiest people in the whole world. John Paul II said, so we have this man dressed in fashionable clothes. You know, it makes a very clear point that the man was wearing purple garments. What's significant about him wearing purple garments? Was he an LSU fan? Is that why he was wearing purple garments? So it makes this point that he's wearing purple. The reason he was wearing purple is because purple was particularly expensive. When you wore purple, it was like carrying a sign that said, I'm rich. because only the wealthiest people could afford purple garments. Now, we don't have anything like that in our culture today where we have a little label or something that says, I paid a lot for this. Or do we? Of course we do. Of course we do. Our purple garments are just a little different now, but they're still here. So John Paul II, reflecting on this gospel, says, was the rich man condemned because he wore purple garments? Was he condemned because he ate sumptuously every day? And after reading this gospel earlier in the week, I keep thinking about how I eat sumptuously every day. Again, we throw a lot of food away. Not because it's rotten, because we don't feel like eating it. We eat sumptuously every day. So was he condemned because he wore purple garments? Was he condemned because he ate sumptuously? Was he condemned because he gave his table scraps to the dog? No, he was condemned because of his blindness to Lazarus. He was condemned because he couldn't see, or he chose not to see. He laid out at the end of his driveway, if you will, every day. Now, in these United States, I recognize how challenging it can be to deal with poverty. And so many people who choose, if you will, a kind of lifestyle that puts them in a circumstance like that. And so it is like a Rubik's Cube, trying to figure out what's the best path forward. But here's the reality. So we don't know the exact solution to this person's problem or that person's problem, but what we are supposed to know is we are supposed to see. We are supposed to see, our eyes are supposed to be open to the reality of the suffering of our brothers and sisters, whether that suffering is material, whether that suffering is spiritual, whether that suffering is emotional, and that we are supposed to care. That we are supposed to care. Christ does not condemn the possession of earthly goods. Instead, he pronounces a harsh judgment on those who use their possessions only in a selfish way, meanwhile being blind to everybody else. This cannot be the attitude of a Christian. I got mine, get yours. The attitude of a Christian must be that we have been blessed, and now we seek a means to be a blessing to others. The rich man did not pay attention to the other. Very few people, as I said, worry about having not enough clothes, not enough calories. We have too much, generally speaking. So, faith without works is dead. Have you ever heard that before? Faith without works is dead. That our faith must generate an action and an attitude and a disposition interiorly. This gospel today is supposed to form our conscience. It's supposed to haunt us a little bit. It's supposed to help us see the world in a different way. Do you know any poor people? The corporal works of mercy: feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, visit the sick, visit the imprisoned. The spiritual works of mercy: to admonish the sinner, to instruct the ignorant. This is spiritual poverty. To admonish the sinner, to instruct the ignorant, to counsel the doubtful, to comfort the sorrowful, to bear wrongs patiently, to forgive sinners. The church teaches that we're supposed to tithe. Did you know that? That we're supposed to give. 10% of our income, that's the ideal. Now, some people can't because of material poverty, because they have one breadwinner and 8 children and they're taking care of a handicapped relative. And the church understands that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all for every single person, but this is a general principle that we should give 5% to our parish and we should give 5% to other charities that are consistent with the Catholic faith. And that is just a guideline for us to be givers, to recognize the great gifts that we have and to give sacrificially. John Paul II, going back to the homily, we can't isolate ourselves. We can't isolate ourselves and wall ourselves off, but we must see. The poor man lacked everything, but he had God. The rich man had everything, but he didn't have God. And Jesus makes it clear who was better off in the end. So today, my brothers and sisters, we are here to be comforted, to be encouraged, to be fed, to renew our covenant, to be invited to the Father's house. But we're also here to be challenged, to open our eyes that we can see.